And a pretty good day for the Aussie market, up by 0.6%, but it's actually the fourth consecutive session where we've seen less than $4 billion being traded. So it's a bit hard to read too much into the market given the very light volumes that we are going through. The big difference to our session were the China numbers that we saw coming through at midday. First quarter GDP numbers coming in ahead of expectations, even though we did see a slowdown from the fourth quarter, coming in at 7.4%. Now quarter on quarter, that's 1.4% or annualized 5.7%. Even though those numbers were better than expected, industrial production just coming in a touch below expectations at 8.8% for March compared to expectations of 9%, although retail sales slightly beating, fixed asset investment slightly missing the mark. But altogether, it did have a positive impact on the Aussie share market. We're also just watching some of the things that are happening offshore as well, and there's been some important levels being tested. We saw the Nasdaq overnight bouncing off that 200-day moving average level, and if we have a look at the Nasdaq, this is a 2-year chart. I've just got the 200-day moving average in red, and you can see that we came right up to that 200-day moving average mark and then managed to bounce off it. So the next couple of sessions are going to be important that we do remain above that 4,000 point mark for the Nasdaq, and gold was the other important one. We actually saw a break below that 200-day moving average, so looking very vulnerable. In terms of those high growth, high tech stocks that we've been watching over the last few sessions, a bit of a mixed performance. We saw Xero down by 1.2%, but Freelancer managed a gain of 1.6%, and we saw REA Group up by 2%. So really no clear trends there, but altogether a quiet day, which was helped along by those China numbers.
John Noonan, just wanted to get your thoughts, particularly on the session overnight.
Well, it was an interesting day because BHP beat expectations and Fortescue actually came in below expectations, but both of the stocks actually ended up on the day. And it was really those China numbers that impacted. I think in the next 24 hours, it's going to be Japan that's very much in focus, and that's probably one of the things that we haven't spoken about that had a huge impact in terms of the US session. In fact, just having a look at the US dollar against the Japanese yen over the last 48 hours, and let me just bring up a chart here. This is a currency chart, and I'll just bring up the 2-day chart so you can see exactly what happened during the US session. And you can see when the US session started, we saw a weakening off of the US currency, but then a report came out in the Nikkei talking about Japan downgrading tomorrow its economic forecast. Now, this would be the first downgrade that we've seen since November 2012. You can see how dramatic the reversal in the currency was, and that also coincided with the reversal that we saw in the US stock market. So that's when we started to see the US stock market rising. So Japan's going to be very much in focus, expecting to see a downgrade coming through tomorrow. And of course, that's going to increase expectations of more stimulus coming out of Japan, which would be a weakening factor for the Japanese yen, but great news for Japanese equity markets. And indeed, if you have a look at the Japanese stock market today, it's up more than 2%, one of the best performing markets around the region. So I think investors still looking at stimulus and the impact that that's going to have on markets. In terms of Fortescue, that was an interesting one today because the numbers actually came in below expectations. 31.5 million tonnes. We know it's a wet weather season in that March quarter, and that had an impact in terms of production and also in terms of costs as well. But they've stuck to their full-year target. 127 million tonnes worth of exports is what they're predicting, and that means for the last quarter of their year, for the fourth quarter, they need to hit 41.6 million tonnes of ore being shipped. This is an absolutely massive amount, and it's a huge ask for Fortescue. It means a jump of more than 30% from the quarter that we've just heard about. So it's a huge expectation going into the current quarter that we are in at the moment, and I think Fortescue's result was a weak one. However, those China numbers ended up boosting the shares.